So we're live with everybody, is that right?
We are.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I love the technical difficulties that we keep learning about and experiencing and working through. It shows great flexibility on all of our parts, I'm just going to say. So I'm Missy Hughes. I'm with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. I have been on the job for what I'm now saying is about 5 + 2 months. I started back on October 1st and had 5 months of a honeymoon, I guess, and then the last 2 months of experiencing COVID-19 with everybody around the state. So, and I've actually spent the morning, I just had 4 different calls with small businesses all around the state. I spend a lot of my time talking to big fancy CEOs, and I've been really seeking out small businesses to understand exactly what they're going through and the challenges, and I think that's the best way to really understand the practical needs of the businesses. And one of those needs, that we've discovered over the course of the last 8 weeks is this idea of how do I reopen in the new normal, and what do I need to be thinking about? I came from Organic Valley, which is a dairy cooperative and very consumer focused. And so from my perspective, the customer is always right. And thinking about the customers coming back into our businesses, coming back into the shop or the cafe, how does that work? And that's one of the reasons that we really pushed forward on the guidelines as part of the Badger Bounce Back Plan. So the governor announced the Badger Bounce Back Plan, and within that was WEDC's work to help businesses be ready to reopen. And that's where the guidelines kind of came about. And I'm glad that considering the Supreme Court's ruling, we were prepared to be able to help businesses think about, like, okay, what do I need to be thinking about as you're standing in the middle of your cafe or your shop and you've got customers coming in and you want them to feel safe and taken care of, and you want your employees to feel safe and confident. It's all part of restarting our economy. So I'm really pleased that the guidelines have been so well received. If you haven't had a chance to look at them, there is a general set of guidelines which really talks about, those basics that we all need to be thinking about: social distancing, sanitizing, disinfecting, wearing masks, and some advice and some thoughts on, what do I do if I have an employee that's sick, and some steps for businesses to consider. And then we have 16 sets of guidelines for individual types of businesses. So hairstylists and restaurants and entertainment venues, construction sites. We really tried to think about the breadth of Wisconsin businesses and, the diversity of our economy and tried to approach it that way. So hopefully those guidelines are helpful, and would love feedback on them. One thing to keep in mind about them is they came from businesses. So we went out and both heard from businesses, these are the protocols that we're putting into place, but we also looked at associations that had been publishing guidelines and protocols, and we kind of curated a set of these guidelines that we thought were really relevant for Wisconsin. And then we worked with the Department of Health to make sure that they were consistent with the advice that the Department of Health Services has been given and has been advocating for. And so I feel really good that we're aligned in that way. And so as a business, if you're, using those guidelines and looking at them, you're working from both the public health perspective and the economic perspective, which is, kind of this dance that we're all having to do right now. A couple other things I'd love to talk about. Yesterday, the application period for a grant program that is based at WEDC opened. This is the Ethnic Minority Emergency Grant Program, and it's a total of $2 million that we'll be distributing in $2,000 chunks. So 1,000 businesses have the opportunity to receive this grant, and it's really focused on the micro businesses of Wisconsin. So this is, to be eligible for this, you need to have 5 or less employees, and that includes the owner. and you're in the retail or hospitality sector. And so the application process is open right now. You can find that on our website at wedc.org. And this was really an effort to reach micro businesses that are not eligible or haven't been able to access the SBA loan programs. They haven't been able to access WEDC programs. So we're really trying to fill some gaps there. The other grant program that I want to tell you about is just announced yesterday, and it is a $75 million program that is coming out of the CARES Act funding that Wisconsin received from the federal government. So part of the CARES Act that was passed back in March was funding to each of the states to help with costs incurred in response to COVID-19. Now, obviously, a lot of the costs that have been incurred in Wisconsin are related to testing and healthcare workers and all the work that was done to flatten the curve and help protect our public health. But part of the CARES Act funding can also be used to help small businesses recover through a grant program. And so over the course of the next few weeks, WEDC will be standing up the $75 million application and grant program. We're going to do that in $2,500 chunks to businesses with less than 20 employees. And, you know, we really recognize that this is not, you know, an amount of money that's going to save a business. But we hope it's an amount that will help a business, you know, if you have to buy PPE, or, you know, you're looking at putting plexiglass into your business, you need to buy some supplies to reopen, whether, you know, if you're a coffee shop, you need to buy milk and pastries and things like that just to get rolling again. So that's our goal, and our hope is that we'll have the application process up and running in early June. And we're going to try and structure it in a way where the application is open for a week. That's what we're doing with the micro grants that we're doing right now, so that there's time to get your papers together and to file, and it's not that like crush of, oh, I have to do this, you know, at 8 o'clock on Monday morning and websites crash and things like that. So we're trying to be thoughtful about that, but we expect that will be open early June, and then with the grants going out a few weeks later, hopefully yet still in June, because we know how important it is to get those resources out. So those are the kind of big happenings at WEDC right now. Obviously continuing to have conversations with folks like you, with businesses all around the state to understand both the short-term impact of COVID-19 and the long-term impact. So John, I think that's the extent of what I have to share right at this moment. Oh, I want to talk about one more thing, if that's okay. Part of the announcement yesterday was with the CARES Act funding is also an effort that WEDC is leading called We're All In Wisconsin. And this is really a hopefulness of creating some momentum behind the idea that we're all in together on our economy recovering. And if we all can work together, we can be concerned about our public health, but also work to reinvigorate our economy by supporting our Main Street businesses, by having, you know, we're all in communities and counties, farmers are going to be involved. You know, we just really want to create a sense of unity of the work of Wisconsin is now to recover and to be moving forward. So you'll be hearing more about We're All In, but I'm excited about it. It's kind of a public service campaign that's a combination of buckle up and just doing the right thing together and celebrating our economy together. So that is the other piece of news that we have coming out of yesterday's announcement, and I'm excited about that. So I think with that, John, I'll turn it back over to you, and hopefully we have some questions or some comments. I really hope to hear from folks.
Okay. I'm going to shift gears now and allow Josh Smith some time to talk about the decision that was made, I guess, yesterday and announced this morning about the termination of the safer or shelter-in-place order. So, Josh, if you would inform the callers about that decision and your view what that means for them.
Sure. Thanks, John. Appreciate the time to come on today to talk a little bit about this and answer questions. So as many of you maybe have seen in the media this morning, had a press conference at 10 o'clock where the health officer, Noel Sandoval, introduced the sort of ROC reopening plan with some phased guidance on how to move into phase one safely after the termination of the order, which she announced would be effective at Thursday at 8 a.m. I wanted to be clear about sort of the rationale behind moving ahead in this way at this time. The metrics that the health department has been putting together locally in this dashboard that they've been creating, which has criteria and benchmarks for when we can move safely out of the order and under a phase one approach that they've been working on since the Supreme Court's decision, and to try to have these guidelines in place. As Noel has said and I've said publicly, the goal of putting the safer at home order in place for us in Rock County after the Supreme Court's decision was based on really trying to give us some time to put a plan in place to smooth the transition a little bit and not just be as abrupt as the court left us with. And so we worked on that, developed that, got to a point where we were feeling that the metrics were pointing in the right direction, had some conversations earlier in the week, met with a group of local leaders. There was about 30 folks on the call, including some local government leaders, some chamber representatives, local nonprofits, public health staff, and others. Try to get some feedback on the metrics, the dashboard, and the plan, and ultimately that led this morning to the announcement of the guidance being issued, as well as the rollback and the termination of the safer at home order. I do want to note, just before I just leave it there, I guess, and John, ask for some more direction from you on what you'd like me to cover after that introduction, is that certainly I think that the business community and those on this call will realize that there's not unanimity of opinion about what we ought to do. I think as you've heard in comments from Ms. Hughes, we've all been preparing for this situation, knowing that it's coming at some point. There's folks who wish that we'd never been in this situation and that wasn't necessary at all. There's folks who wish that we could stay everybody locked down for the foreseeable future. And then there's the reality in the middle that we have to live with and plan for here. So just as we go forward through this into phase one and begin to think about how we're going to all interact with each other and reopen our businesses and organizations, I just want to leave that out there that there's certainly not agreement that this was the right decision to make. Certainly a lot of folks unhappy about it, as there were as many folks unhappy about the issuance of the order last week after the Supreme Court's decision. So I'm happy to talk about any more details, some of the how we got here, some of the details of the guidance itself, some of the metrics, or any other future steps, John, that you think would be valuable. But I guess just an introduction, I would maybe leave it there and see what you think.
I'm going to break with protocol and ask you a question right now rather than wait till the end, because it's on the minds of a whole lot of people. Employees, customers, and business owners all need confidence, as you said, that these numbers are moving in the right direction, that there's an adequate amount of information that leads us to the belief that we can do this safely. And I expect you get this question a lot. I'm just actually, I've heard you answer it, and you're so good at it. If you would, just tell our callers why you think the numbers lead you to this conclusion.
You're right. So, I mean, I won't go into details about what all the numbers represent and what all the metrics are in the plan. It's out on the website, and people can go through that. And I can go into that in more detail if you'd like at some point. But there's metrics there, and we look at the trends. These are 14-day trends. I think you've heard a lot about 14-day trends over the past 2 months. And so what we see here in a good example would be that the very first metric is that less than 5% of tests in the county are positive when averaged across 14 days, most recent 14-day period. And on this dashboard, you're going to see red, yellow, and green, sort of easy to understand metrics and criteria. We're in the yellow there. The yellow criteria means that, we've got 5 to 10% positive cases. We'd like to get below 5 to get into the green, and right now we're about 7. And so even though we're not in the green yet for all these categories, we've got about 6 yellow categories left. We're trending in the right direction. So over the last 14-day period, those numbers are going down, and even though it kind of goes up and down a little bit, we feel that it's headed in the right direction, where we're confident that it's as good as a time as it's going to be to do that. The other point I'd make, the question I get that's related to that, is what happens when they get worse. And what we don't want to have happen is this zigzag yo-yo situation where people are afraid that, well, gosh, if tomorrow something flips back into the red in any of those metrics, that we're going to just automatically close things up again. And that's not what the intent here is to have happen. We feel confident enough going forward that we're going to be able to maintain this. It's going to take the support of all of us to do. But the goal will be not when we have a red blip back on the screen, which I think may happen at some point, that we're trying to create infrastructure, and you maybe heard me talk about this sort of task force that we're trying to put in place that will kind of wrap around the needs of our community, and we'll be tracking, when we start to see the trends maybe go in a opposite direction that we'd hope, that we would be able to identify that quickly, bring some resources quickly to bear through folks who are paying attention to this and ready to have infrastructure in place to jump on support for our community, in whether it's businesses or nonprofits or whatever, and that we'd be able to bring that back before it gets worse and bring that back into the yellow or into the green, where we know that we can continue to manage it. So that that's sort of the reason that we feel comfortable going forward with the metrics as they are. There's going to be questions about the curve. For example, we've had our epidemiologists doing curves, and when are we going to hit the peak? And for those of you who've been intensely involved in trying to follow this kind of science, it's imperfect, and there's different models across the country. At one point, we were thinking our peak was in April at some point, and then we thought it was May, and then the current model shows it's in June. But as Nick, our epidemiologist, said on the press conference this morning, that those are really based on sort of recent trends, and we did have the bird's eye peak, which pushed out that curve into June. So the reconciliation of some of the numbers out there is a little bit of a challenge for folks. But based on our day-to-day metrics that we're tracking, that we have more confidence in, we feel that we're in a good place to be able to do this.
Thanks, Josh. I'm going to turn now to our Dan Cunningham, who's going to give us a very brief summary of the work he's been doing, monitoring state and federal and everything in between. Dan?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for bearing with us. These kinds of technical issues make me wake up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, but we have gotten through it. We are getting through challenges right and left here in Rock County, and we'll continue to do that. So we continue to keep our eyes on multiple balls at the local, state, and federal level. Give you an example real briefly. There was a lot of concern recently about how the SBA would determine if your PPP loan was, quote, necessary to support the ongoing operations of your business. Now, there's a lot at stake here. The loan was found to be unnecessary. There could be some serious criminal and fiscal liability that could result from that. So businesses were scrambling. They were trying to figure out, do I need to return my PPP loan? What is the SBA's definition of necessary going to be? So what we did is we contacted Congressman Stiles' office. We asked for the SBA to be clear in their guidance. We adopted them to adopt a business-friendly definition of necessary in their PPP guidance. And the bottom line, I'll simplify this as much as I can. 16 pages of guidance from the SBA came out, and basically, if you received a PPP loan of less than $2 million, you will not be audited. You have met the standard that you've met the required certification concerning the necessity of the loan if it's under $2 million. If it's over $2 million, you will have a chance to have your day before the SBA, so to speak. But the SBA made this decision because they didn't want to have to audit, 10 million loans, so they decided to go in that way. So that's an example of the kind of work we're doing these days. We've got our eyes on a bunch of other stuff, including the Phase 4 stimulus legislation. You may have seen the House passed another $3 trillion stimulus bill, which is an unimaginable amount of money. That bill faces an uphill battle in the Senate. It contained a bunch of new provisions, $1 trillion to the state, more assistance to individuals of $1,200, but it may be dead on arrival in the Senate. The Senate is way more concerned with liability protection. So what happens if someone comes into your business, says they contracted COVID-19 there, and files a suit against you? The Senate's looking to protect businesses from that sort of stuff. So I will say there's less urgency about this Phase 4 stimulus legislation than there have been for the other stimulus bills, but it's certainly something that bears watching. Also watching unemployment insurance concerns. Some people applied for benefits 2 months ago and haven't gotten anything yet. Others are concerned that, the extension of these benefits creates a disincentive to work. So there's a lot that we're watching at the federal and state and local level each and every day. So we encourage you to continue to contact us with concerns that you have. We are happy to help. We are here from you, and we will get through this together. So thanks again, John, and everybody on the call.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you for being so concise, given that we started a little late. So let's move to questions now. And Secretary Hughes, we have one here that I think is in your lane, and that is, given the national press about we've been called the Wild West, the focus on political gridlock, what is WEDC doing to help our image? And I hope you know that we have a couple hundred acres of prime development site land that was formerly the GM site. I guess the question is, Brown, what is WEDC doing to promote the state to new investors?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest challenges right now across the board, across the country, is businesses. Instability and uncertainty is the enemy of business. And so here in Wisconsin, clearly the last couple weeks we have had some instability within our political environment, and that's resulted in statements like "we're the Wild West," or pictures of bars on the front page of the New York Times. But I think something to keep in mind is that while there's this kind of 24-hour news cycle, we've also done a tremendous job in flattening the curve, and really we've actually been much more successful in coming through this than many other states. And so I think hopefully that will be the story that carries the day. And one of the reasons that we're launching the We're All In campaign that I referred to earlier is to try to start to bring some unifying conversations to Wisconsin, and going back to our strengths of community and our quality of life and things like that, so that when businesses are looking at moving away from their state to perhaps coming to Wisconsin, that's the story that we really want them to hear and that they will be hearing. We have not changed our programming around attracting businesses. We still have our tools in our toolbox, and we don't anticipate that changing. Right now, we're not, I don't think anybody is really doing a lot of moving around, so we're not doing a ton of business attraction right now. But we are hearing still about businesses that are interested in moving from Illinois to southeastern Wisconsin, and so that's encouraging. I just spoke with somebody the other day that said, looks like we have a deal for somebody to move up from Illinois. So we'll still see some of that movement in the coming period of time, and WEDC certainly will continue to try to have a steady as she goes message for businesses both within Wisconsin and for those that are interested in coming.
Okay, I have another question here in front of me that is very similar, so I'm just going to stay with you, if you don't mind, Secretary.
No problem.
The fact is, there's speculation in the economic development community that perhaps resources that were previously earmarked for expanding businesses and business attraction may be shifted or reprogrammed. Can you speak to that rumor?
Well, I don't know where that rumor is coming from. And there's a lot of rumors out there right now. But
yeah.
what I would say is I think, we're going to be in a resource-constrained environment going forward from, every perspective there is, especially from an economic development perspective. So we want to make sure that, as the earth stops shaking here and we start to move forward, that we're deploying resources in what makes the most sense for Wisconsin as we go forward. And, if that's support for our small businesses, if it's support for our large businesses, I think what we need to have is the willingness to say, okay, where do we need to deploy resources right now? If you think about tax credits and things like that, that is dependent on state budgets. And so we need to be having a whole conversation about, where are we going to have resources and how will we be using them, which is great. Since I came on the job in October, I've said, we need to all be having this conversation about how are we investing taxpayer dollars in economic development. And so this is, going to be a continuation of that conversation.
That conversation never seems to end, Secretary.
I don't think so.
That's right. A follow-up for you is it relates to what you're seeing around the state in terms of employers protecting their employees. Is it your view that workers in factories, in warehouses, and distribution centers should wear masks all the time while they are at work? And should there be a 6-foot rule for employees in our state's plants?
Well, those types of activities, the social distancing, the cleaning and disinfecting, and wearing masks we are learning that those are the best ways to stop the spread of COVID-19. And we don't have a vaccine, so we have to be looking at these best practices as the best options for keeping down the spread of the virus. And, one of the reasons I'm so concerned about keeping the spread of the virus down, besides the public health factors, is if we have surges, if we have hotspots, that's going to impact the confidence that we were talking about earlier. And so we have to be thinking about how do we avoid those surges so that we can keep confidence going, we can regain momentum in the economy, which is going to ultimately help us pull out of this. When it comes to working within a business and restrictions or requirements within a business, businesses know what makes sense for their businesses. And, I think in particular, when it comes to something like masks, I want businesses to be really thoughtful about safety, which I know they are. So there's safety as far as avoiding the spread of COVID-19, but also making sure that folks have, the right vision. They can see what they're doing. They're not going to get injured by equipment. There's a whole pile of concerns that businesses need to have in this moment. But I think, if we can do what we can to keep those best practices in mind, cleaning, masks, social distancing, then we're going to help our economy regain momentum.
No question. Josh, I hope you're with us. And the question that I have a couple of here that are related, and one of them is the size of events that you will be able to host after these safe at home guidelines have been lifted. Will there be a limit for weddings or graduation parties or a capacity issue related to outdoor seating at restaurants?
Yeah, those are good questions. Those have come up. So the guidance, what the guidance says, sort of in phase one, as you think about just gatherings in general. There's what you're going to see in the stories and then the guidance is 25%, right? So right now, what phase one says is the suggestion is for 25% capacity with physical distancing and appropriate protective measures. As Secretary indicated, we want to continue to tell people to follow those physical distancing and safety measures, regardless of what we're doing. So 25% capacity is the way to think about it. So not necessarily a size capacity that, it's up to 10, 25, 50, but really a percentage for those public venues, private gatherings. Obviously it's just guidance. as we talked about before, when the orders first came down and we were talking about how many people could get together, 10 people in a location, we're still kind of suggesting that if you've got a small place, you may want to think private gatherings, to 10 people, just again with appropriate measures in place. But again, I think that everybody has a different situation, right? And outdoor of seating is going to really open up things, I think, potentially for restaurants, for example, where, everything that we're hearing now is outdoors is better than indoors. And so, I think by having some outdoor seating capacity, you're really going to be able to increase the amount of people you're going to be able to serve. And certainly outdoor events going forward, the guidance includes things related to sporting, recreational activities. And so there's some specific guidance in there for recreational activities as well. Again, a lot of it's based on, depending on the situation, 25% capacity limits, or depending on where you are, like at a playground, trying to keep 10 people or less in that general area, even with the 6 feet apart issues. So those are just some highlights there, I guess, of how I described it, and get more granular if you'd like as we go through the guidance.
So if a business owner had very specific questions about capacity for outdoor seating and the like, who should they contact?
Yeah, so right now, certainly there's a lot of questions, and I don't want to overwhelm anybody. The health department is here to support you in what you do, and they've been in touch with, I hope, some of you already, but certainly some of the larger manufacturing facilities in the county, in trying to talk about plans and guidance about how to even operate as essential businesses. But as we open back up, they still want to be a resource for you about that. What I also hope is that once we get sort of the task force up and running, that's going to be a resource. And I would point you to the WDC guidance in particular. I think there's been a lot of positivity about that, and about that being a good resource to go to. We've got links to the CDC guidance and other things as part of this reopening plan as well that people can go to. But I think it's more than changing the mindsets from thinking about what is allowed under an order, and what is the common sense approach based on this guidance. And I think a restaurant owner, for example, is going to know what their capacity is. The fire inspector lets you know that pretty clearly, right? And so you can do the math on 25% of that, but then what is the configuration of my restaurant, and can I safely fit even 25% in, or how's this going to work for me? And so certainly able to provide some guidance from the health department, but also we're kind of moving into that common sense phase where I think we're just going to have to all get it adjusted to kind of what is a common sense approach going forward.
I'm going to stay in your lane for just a minute, Josh, because I have several questions about the extent to which you have or will work with other governmental agencies. For example, did the City of Janesville's guidelines inform your decision or help you with the guidelines? We have another person who asked about surrounding counties, and as we all know, many of the surrounding counties have decided already to loosen things up. And I'm wondering if there's communication countywide or between the city, and you're trying as best you can to mesh all these various forms of regulatory authority into one set of rules and one set of guidelines that you can pass out.
Yeah, you're right. That's really one of the areas that's confusing right now when there's been so much change in counties that are implementing orders and then rescinding them, and it's hard to know what to follow right now. Directly answering your question though, so the city sent me their guidelines last week that were in draft form at that time. My understanding is that their guidelines sort of took the WDC guidelines and tried to condense them a little bit into one document. And so I would say that the city's guidelines are going to be consistent with what the WDC is supporting. So in that way, right? I mean, we would support those as well. I think what we're going to see in the county's sort of phased reopening plan is going to be less detailed than that. Those guidelines are great resources to go to when you kind of want to know, okay, exactly kind of based on my industry sector, how should I approach this issue? And you kind of pull open the city's guidance, the WDC guidance, and you'll see in there some specific suggestions. The county's guidance is going to be much higher level based on things we talked about, about these, high-level general physical distancing measures, the capacity issues, so a higher level than the city's guidance, really. In that way, they certainly would fit together. Some of the bigger conversation the past few days has been about sort of the larger area, not just the city of Janesville in the county, but all the municipalities in the county, Dane County, Walworth County, Greene County. How do we all fit together? We've been planning even before the Supreme Court issued its decision. We've been planning regionally with our neighboring counties to try to come up with consistent guidance, even though we knew that there wasn't really such a thing as a regional order. We're all planning to try to have similar metrics because, as we've heard many times, this COVID does not stop at the border anywhere. So as that kind of evolved, if you look at what Dane has out as metrics now, they're very similar to ours. They put something out yesterday as far as their reopening plan, although they've not lifted their order yet, as I understand. But others around here probably have similar approaches. Greene County, they lifted their order, I think yesterday, maybe the day before. Walworth County didn't issue one, which makes for a patchwork of challenges. Within the county, as I said before, there's certainly some disagreement about whether we ought to even be doing this right now. We're very concerned about Beloit. That's where the most impact has been. Again, I would say, particularly among our Hispanic and Latino community, very concerned about them as well. And so, you probably saw that Beloit took some action in passing a resolution to kind of implement some of its own guidelines and some directives, which, again, we are fully supportive of that approach. If that's something that the municipality feels they want to provide some further direction, then that's certainly welcome. Our goal going forward is just to keep the confusion down, and that's, I think, where we're going to be challenged here in the next several days, at least.
Thank you, Josh. Secretary Hughes, a question here I think is quite interesting. It's from a member who says, you undoubtedly are talking to businesses around the state. We had, in fact, I will add to this question, the head of the Wisconsin Restaurant Association on a couple of weeks ago, and she was kind of sobering, talking about perhaps 30% of restaurants potentially on life support and maybe not being able to make it through this. The question really is, you're talking to these small businesses. If you could synthesize the feedback that you're getting from small businesses across the state, what is the final summation of how the condition of small businesses around the state?
I think there's a couple different pieces to this, and it's a great question. UW Oshkosh has helped do a statewide survey of small businesses, and we've also done anecdotal conversations. I've got regional economic development directors all around the state, and I've asked them to anecdotally provide me with what they're seeing. And then we've been looking at big data as far as we have the ability to look at consumer trends and consumer transactions across the state, which gives us a real-time look at what's happening. And, the reality is that what we're seeing reflects that 30% number of businesses that are really saying, if this goes on for much longer, we won't survive. So I think, the sum of what I'm hearing is we have to start to pull out of this as quickly as we can, which I think is what you heard in the urgency of the conversations over the last few weeks of we need to reopen. But also a concern that if we don't have a smooth pullout of this, I don't want to say dive, but that's the only word that can come to my mind right now, that, if we have surges, I'm not sure that I can withstand that either. So there's a lack of, I think businesses have been as resilient as they can be, but we're seeing businesses, use up their savings, use up any equity that they have, and get really concerned about, if I can't start to have some revenue coming back into the door, I won't be able to survive this. So it is very sobering. But I tell you, at the same time, I keep having conversations with small businesses that, I listened to a small childcare business the other day say, this is a challenge. This is a challenge. Oh, we had a parent who tested positive for COVID, so we had to shut down for a few days. This is a challenge. And then the very last thing she said was, but it's all going to work out. It's going to work out. And so there is a hardiness and an optimism that I keep seeing that is really, I think, remarkable. And it shows the spirit of Wisconsin to, work through a bad winter or a bad crop season or, a global pandemic and somehow still think, we're going to come out the other side of this. So I hold on to that as an optimistic piece. But I think, we're gonna continue to have a slog here. And I think what's going to be really critical is as businesses are able to reopen, if we can think of ourselves as customers of those businesses and go and do what we can, understanding that everybody's belts are tightening, but, do what we can to support those Main Street businesses and to help them come back and buy local and all of that, I think is going to be really critical towards helping those small businesses and avoiding that 30% number from becoming a reality.
So true. We are set to be champions, and we have been champions for our local businesses, and I see that around the entire state. It's up to everybody to do their part. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I would just add from WEDC's perspective, we live for the most part on a big business perspective, working with industries and, large businesses, and everyone has taken a moment, I think, during this process and realized how incredibly important the small businesses are in our state. And so I hope that, that's something that we continue to think about as we come through this process.
Vitally important point. Josh, I got a quick hitter because we are running low, but this is really important. The question is, I want it to be clear that Josh that you're providing guidance, that you have lifted the order, and will there be enforcement of this guidance?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, to clarify, the order, still in effect right this moment. It will be lifted as of 8 a.m. this coming Thursday, and the intent is to give some time for people to prepare for what that's going to look like. I know they've been preparing already. In this conversation I had with our community leaders on Monday, that was their recommendation, that we not just do what the Supreme Court did and ended at the moment, but that we move forward with a little off-ramp there. So following 8 a.m. on Thursday, though, that is exactly right. We are out from under an order. It is guidance only. And there is no more county-wide enforcement of any such rules, right? So if you have 30%, 50% capacity in your facility, there's no enforcement from that. We're providing this information as guidance and sort of best practice, and it really is up to all of us now to do our best to, as the Secretary indicated, make sure that we don't backslide and that people can have confidence in coming out to reopen the economy, because if they feel like it's not safe, they're not going to come back. And then I think that's what we're trying to avoid going forward.
Thank you, Josh. I'm going to wrap things up here. I want to thank you, Josh, for reaching out to us and other members of the business community. I know you reached out to lots of different sectors, but you included us, and we appreciate you hearing our perspective. And to the Secretary, thank you for what your department is doing to assist businesses through this. The guidelines are hugely important, and for all the businesses listening, we encourage you to, in the interest of supporting and protecting your customers and, of course, your employees, take the time to really look at those guidelines and implement them to the very best of your ability. We also want to thank our friends in the Beloit Chamber and the Milton Chamber for joining us. We reached out to them knowing this topic is obviously very relevant to all the businesses in the area, and we thank for all their members for joining us. We will partner with you through these next steps. We are here every day and working on your behalf. It's important for us to get the feedback to help you to get through this. So if there are additional questions that you need answers to, please let us know. Call us, email us, and we will do our best to get the answers you need. So with that, I want to thank you. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I've been reminded that this afternoon we will be releasing our personal protective equipment toolkit. Please look for that. It could be another resource to help you through this. Thank you for reminding me of that. And with that, I thank the presenters and all those callers for tuning in today. We hope you found this to be valuable. Have a safe and prosperous day. Thank you.